Malcolm's knuckles turned white against the armrest as the private jet engine screamed to life beneath him. 38,000 feet of separation between him and his latest failure, and still, it wouldn't be enough. Welcome to Stories by Mr. Gideon, where we dive deep into tales of love, redemption, and the kind of life-changing moments that remind us what truly matters. I'm Mr. Gideon, and today's story? Well, it's about a man who had everything money could buy and nothing his heart actually needed. So buckle up, hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and let's see if a billionaire can learn what real wealth actually means. The city lights of Indianapolis shimmered somewhere below, but Malcolm barely noticed. He was too busy drowning in the wreckage of his own making. $27 million. That's what the deal was worth. That's what he'd just watched evaporate like morning fog because he'd been too aggressive, too confident, too damn sure that his Midas touch would never fail him. The flight attendant approached with her practiced smile and leather-bound drink menu, but Malcolm waved her away without even looking up. Right now, bourbon couldn't touch the kind of bitter he was tasting. See, what the world saw was Malcolm Hartley, real estate mogul, venture capitalist, the man who turned Detroit warehouses into luxury lofts and made 8 figures doing it. What they didn't see was the hollow echo in his penthouse at 2 in the morning, or the way success tasted like ash when there was no one to share it with. But that's the thing about pride, isn't it? It'll convince you that being alone at the top is better than being vulnerable with someone at your side. 3 years. That's how long it had been since he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 years since he'd looked into Martha's eyes and told her he couldn't do it anymore. Not because he didn't love her. God, he'd loved her more than his next breath. But because he'd promised her the world and couldn't deliver it fast enough. The penthouse was still under construction. The yacht was a pipe dream. The life he'd painted in Technicolor during their courtship was still stubbornly black and white in reality. And Malcolm Hartley didn't fail. Malcolm Hartley didn't ask for patience or admit he needed time. So instead, Malcolm Hartley walked away. He remembered their wedding vows, whispered under a canopy of fairy lights in her mother's backyard. Simple, beautiful. Everything Martha was. She'd worn a dress from a consignment shop and looked like an angel descended. He'd promised her mansions and diamonds, trips to Monaco and Paris. She'd only smiled and said she just wanted him, but he hadn't believed her. How could he? In his world, love came with a price tag, and if you couldn't pay it, you didn't deserve to play. The irony wasn't lost on him now, sitting in his private jet, having made the fortune he'd chased, and feeling more bankrupt than he'd ever felt in those early struggling years with Martha beside him. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to push back the memory of her face on the day he'd handed her the divorce papers. She hadn't cried. That was the worst part. She just looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes and said, "If this is what you need, Malcolm," as if his leaving was somehow for his own good, as if she understood him better than he understood himself. What Malcolm didn't know, what he couldn't have known because pride had made him deaf and blind, was that Martha had been carrying a secret that day, a secret that would have changed everything, but he'd been too busy running from his own perceived failure to notice the way her hand had moved protectively to her stomach, or the tears she'd held back until he was gone. The plane leveled off, and Malcolm finally lifted his head, staring at nothing in particular. Indianapolis. He was going back to the city where it all started, where he'd met Martha at a charity gala 7 years ago. She'd been singing with her church choir, volunteering their talents to raise money for kids in need. Her voice had stopped him dead in his tracks, pure, powerful, and so full of joy it made his chest ache. He'd introduced himself during the reception, fumbling over his words like a teenager instead of the up-and-coming developer he was trying to be. She'd laughed, and that laugh had sealed his fate. But fate, as they say, is a funny thing. Because just when Malcolm thought he'd buried the past deep enough that it couldn't hurt anymore, just when he'd convinced himself that loneliness was the price of ambition, he heard footsteps echoing through the cabin behind him. He didn't turn. Probably just the flight attendant again, determined to push that drink menu on him. But then he caught it, a scent that made his heart stop. Lavender and vanilla. The same perfume Martha had worn every single day of their marriage. The same scent he'd buried his face in when they danced in their tiny apartment kitchen at midnight, broke but deliriously happy. His head turned slowly, mechanically, like a man afraid of what he might see. And there she was. Martha walked down the aisle of his private jet, like she'd walked into his life 7 years ago, with grace, confidence, and that same radiant smile that had always made him believe in things bigger than bank accounts. She wore a light summer dress, cream-colored with tiny blue flowers, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Time had been kind to her, more than kind. She was somehow even more beautiful than the day he'd let her go. But it wasn't Martha who made Malcolm's world tilt on its axis. It was the two little figures holding her hands. Twins, a boy on her left, a girl on her right. They couldn't have been more than 3 years old, with coiling dark curls and skin the exact shade of his morning coffee, that perfect blend of his deep bronze and her warm honey. The boy had his nose. The girl had Martha's smile. And both of them had eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence, looking around. The cabin with the fearless curiosity of children who'd been loved well and often. Malcolm couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare as the mathematical impossibility of the situation rearranged itself into devastating clarity. 3 years since the divorce. 3-year-old children. Martha had been pregnant when he'd left. The realization hit him like a physical blow, stealing whatever air remained in his lungs. He'd walked away from his wife. He'd walked away from his children. He'd abandoned them all because he'd been too proud to admit he needed more time, too scared to ask for help, too focused on some imagined standard of success to see the actual treasure he already held. Martha reached his row and stopped, still holding both tiny hands. The children giggled, pointing at the windows, at the clouds outside, at everything, except the man whose world they'd just shattered and rebuilt in the same breath. And when Martha finally spoke, her voice was exactly as he remembered it, soft, steady, and strong enough to carry the weight of everything unsaid. "Hello, Malcolm." 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words, and the careful walls he'd built around his heart for 3 years crumbled like they were made of sand. But here's the question that's burning through Malcolm's mind right now. The same question. I'm asking you, what do you say to the family you didn't know you'd abandoned? How do you apologize for missing 3 years of your children's lives? And can love, real, true, bone-deep love, survive the kind of pride that walks away from everything that matters? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and before you go anywhere, smash that like button if this story's got you hooked. Subscribe to Stories by Mr. Gideon, because trust me, if you think this is intense, wait until you see where the rest of the story takes us. And hey, hit that notification bell too, because the next part of Malcolm and Martha's story drops soon, and you're not going to want to miss what happens when he finally finds his voice. I'm Mr. Gideon, reminding you that the best stories aren't just told, they're felt. And this one, oh, we're just getting started. Malcolm's voice, when it finally came, was nothing more than a broken whisper cutting through the hum of the jet engines. "Martha, is that really you?" Now, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine coming face to face with the biggest mistake of your life at 30,000 feet, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and 2 pairs of innocent eyes staring at you. Eyes that carry half your DNA but don't know your name. That's where we left Malcolm Hartley, folks. Frozen in his first-class seat, staring at the ghost of his past and the future he never knew existed. Martha's smile didn't falter. If anything, it softened, the way candlelight softens the edges of a dark room. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She didn't make it easy for him. She simply stood there, her hands still protectively holding those 2 beautiful children, and nodded once. Slow, deliberate, confirming what Malcolm's shattered heart already knew, but his mind was still desperately trying to deny. The little girl, she couldn't have been more than 3, tugged on Martha's dress and pointed at the window. "Mama, clouds." Her voice was high and sweet, untouched by the weight of the moment crushing down on the adults around her. Martha squeezed her daughter's hand gently, murmuring something soft, that Malcolm couldn't quite hear over the blood rushing in his ears. The boy, quieter and more observant, kept his eyes fixed on Malcolm with an intensity that was unnerving. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not just his face but his soul. Malcolm tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. His hands gripped the armrests like they were the only things tethering him to reality. "And our twins?" The words scraped out of his throat, rough and raw, carrying 3 years of guilt he hadn't even known he should be feeling. Martha glanced down at the children, then back at Malcolm. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength that he didn't remember from their marriage, or maybe he'd never noticed it before. "Yes, Malcolm. Adam and Nina, your son and daughter. Born 3 years ago, about 2 months after you handed me those divorce papers in your lawyer's office. 2 months. The math was brutal in its simplicity. She'd known, or at least suspected, and he'd been too wrapped up in his own perceived inadequacy to notice the signs, too blind to see past his own reflection in the mirror failure he'd built for himself. But here's what's really twisting the knife right now. Martha wasn't angry. That's the part that was destroying Malcolm more than any screaming match could have. She wasn't crying or throwing his abandonment in his face. She was just there, present, calm, like she'd already worked through every stage of grief and come out the other side while he was still stuck at the starting line, trying to figure out how to apologize for something this monumentally unforgivable. The flight attendant appeared again, sensing the tension but professionally trained to ignore it. "Can I get anything for you and your family, Mum?" Family. The word hung in the air like a question no one knew how to answer. Martha smiled warmly at the attendant. "Just some apple juice for the kids, please, and maybe some crackers if you have them." The attendant nodded and disappeared, leaving them in their bubble of complicated history and uncertain present. Martha gestured to the empty seats across from Malcolm. "May we sit?" It was such a normal question, so painfully polite, that it made Malcolm want to break something. Here was the woman he'd abandoned, asking permission to sit in his presence, carrying the children he'd unknowingly left behind. He nodded frantically, finally finding enough coordination to gesture toward the plush leather seats. Adam and Nina climbed up with the clumsy determination of toddlers, their little legs swinging as they settled in. Nina immediately pressed her nose against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the clouds roll by. Adam, though, kept his eyes on Malcolm, studying him with an unsettling awareness. Martha noticed and reached over to brush a curl from her son's forehead. "It's okay, baby. This is—" She paused, and in that pause, Malcolm felt the full weight of his absence. What was he to them? A stranger? A name they'd never heard? "This is an old friend of Mama's," Martha finished, and somehow that hurt worse than if she'd called him nothing at all. The flight attendant returned with juice boxes and a small package of crackers. Nina grabbed hers immediately, puncturing the foil with her tiny straw, with a kind of fierce concentration that made Malcolm's chest ache. Adam accepted his more carefully, still watching Malcolm, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Once the attendant left again, Martha leaned back in her seat and took a slow breath. The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence, and she instinctively reached out to steady both children, her mother's reflexes sharp and automatic. When the air smoothed out again, she turned her full attention to Malcolm, and he realized with a jolt that this was it. This was the moment where she'd tell him everything he'd missed, everything he'd thrown away, and he'd have to sit there and take it because he'd earned every word. "You want to know how I managed?" Martha asked, and it wasn't really a question. "You want to know how a woman you left with nothing built a life for 2 babies on her own?" Malcolm could only nod, his throat too tight for words. This was going to hurt. He knew it was going to hurt, and he deserved every second of it. Martha's eyes drifted to the window, to the endless expanse of sky beyond. "When you left, I was 8 weeks pregnant. I'd taken the test 3 days before you came home with those papers. I was planning this whole surprise. I'd bought these tiny little booties. 1 pair in blue, 1 in yellow, because I didn't know yet. I was going to tell you over dinner." She laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "Funny how life works, isn't it? I was rehearsing my big announcement while you were rehearsing your exit speech." The image hit Malcolm like a physical blow. Martha, young and scared and excited, holding baby booties and planning a celebration. while he was across town, signing documents that would tear them apart. How many times had he replayed that day in his mind, convinced he was doing the noble thing? How many nights had he told himself he was setting her free to find someone better, someone who could give her the life she deserved? "I didn't tell you," Martha continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I thought about it. God, I stood there with those papers in my hand, and I almost said it. Almost grabbed your arm and said, 'Wait, there's something you need to know.' But then I looked at your face and I saw how sure you were, how convinced that leaving was the right thing. And I thought, what if I tell him and he stays out of obligation? What if he resents these babies because they trapped him in a life he was so desperate to escape? Now that's a question that'll haunt a man, isn't it? What would you have done in Martha's position? Would you have told him? Would you have used those children as a reason for him to stay, knowing he might grow to resent them? Or would you have let him go, choosing the harder path of raising them alone, rather than raising them with a father who didn't want to be there? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is the kind of moral complexity that doesn't have easy answers. Malcolm's hands were shaking now. "I would have stayed," he managed to choke out. "Martha, I would have—" "Would you?" She cut him off gently, but firmly. "Would you really, Malcolm? Or would you have stayed in body while your heart was somewhere else, chasing the success you thought defined you? Would our children have grown up with a father who was present but not really there?" She shook her head slowly. "I couldn't take that risk. So I let you go. I cashed the settlement check you insisted on giving me even though I didn't want it, and I moved back to Indianapolis to be near my family. The settlement, $50,000. He'd thought he was being generous, helping her get back on her feet. It hadn't even occurred to him that she might be carrying his children. $50,000 to raise twins on her own while he went on to make millions. The pregnancy was hard, Martha said, her voice taking on a distant quality, like she was watching her own story unfold from somewhere outside herself. Twins usually are, but I was alone and working 2 jobs trying to save money for when I couldn't work anymore. My mother helped when she could, but she was taking care of my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. My sister was overseas with her military husband, so it was mostly just me, a 1-bedroom apartment in Fountain Square, and a whole lot of prayer. Nina had finished her juice and was now leaning against her mother's arm, her eyelids drooping with the exhaustion that hits toddlers like a freight train. Martha adjusted her position so Nina could rest more comfortably, never breaking stride in her story. This was a woman who'd learned to do 17 things at once out of necessity, and Malcolm was beginning to understand exactly how much necessity she'd faced. "I was working at a diner until I was 7 months along," she continued, slinging hash browns and coffee from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then I'd head to my second job doing data entry for an insurance company from 3 to 9. I'd fall into bed at night and these two would kick up a storm, like they were already fighting for space, already letting me know they were here and they were real, and they needed me to be stronger than I'd ever been. Malcolm's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall, even though he had no right to claim his own pain when Martha had lived through so much worse. "How did you, when they were born, were you alone?" Martha finished for him. "For the labor? No. My church family showed up. Pastor Richard stayed with me the whole time, and Sister Julia, you remember her, the older woman who always brought me homemade soup? She was there holding my hand when I pushed Adam out at 3:47 a.m. Nina came 17 minutes later, screaming bloody murder, like she was furious. Her brother had gone first. A genuine smile crossed Martha's face at the memory, soft and warm. They were so tiny, 4 pounds each, had to stay in the NICU for 2 weeks. 2 weeks in the NICU. Malcolm had been in Vegas 2 weeks after the divorce, celebrating a land deal with bottle service and strangers, while Martha sat in a hospital room watching their premature babies fight for every breath through tubes and wires. The bills were, Martha paused, searching for the right word, insurmountable. Even with Medicaid, even with the settlement money, I was drowning. But my church stepped in. They held fundraisers, passed around donation jars, organized meal trains for when we finally came home. Brother Marcus, the one. With the construction company, he repaired my apartment for free when I realized I couldn't fit 2 cribs in that tiny bedroom. Sister Angela, the school teacher, she bought diapers and formula in bulk and showed up every Sunday with supplies. This was the part that was really killing Malcolm. Not just that Martha had suffered, but that strangers had stepped in to do what he should have been doing. People who owed her nothing had given her everything, while he, the man, who'd promised her the world, had left her with less than nothing. Adam was watching this exchange with those sharp, intelligent eyes, and Malcolm wondered how much a 3-year-old could understand. Did he know his mother was talking about the time before he could remember? Did he sense the undercurrent of pain beneath her measured words? The first year was survival mode, Martha said. I barely slept, between 2 babies who needed feeding every 3 hours and trying to work from home doing freelance bookkeeping. I was running on prayer and coffee. My mother moved in for 6 months to help, and honestly, I don't know if I would have made it without her. She'd rock Adam while I fed Nina, or vice versa. She'd do laundry while I caught an hour of sleep. She never once said, "I told you so," about the divorce, even though she'd always thought you were moving too fast, pushing too hard. The criticism stung because it was true. Martha's family had always been wary of him, sensing perhaps what Martha hadn't, that his ambition was a hungry thing that might consume everything in its path, including love. But even in those hard moments, Martha continued, I had something you didn't, Malcolm. I had community. I had people who showed up not because they expected anything in return, but because that's what you do for family. And my church family? They became my lifeline. Sunday mornings, I'd bring the twins to service, and before I could even get them out of their car seats, there'd be 5 people offering to hold them, feed them, change them. Those babies were passed around like little bundles of joy, and they grew up surrounded by love from every direction. Here's what Martha was really saying, though she was too gracious to spell it out. She'd built a richer life without his money than he'd built with all of his. She'd found wealth in relationships while he'd been counting zeros in bank accounts. She'd invested in community while he'd been investing in properties. And her returns? 2 healthy, happy children who knew they were loved, versus his portfolio of empty achievements. The turbulence hit again, stronger this time, and the seatbelt sign dinged on. Martha buckled Nina in carefully, then reached over to help Adam with his, her movements efficient and practiced. Malcolm realized he didn't even know if they could buckle themselves yet, didn't know what developmental milestones 3-year-olds should be hitting, didn't know anything about these children who were half him. What are they like? The question came out hoarse and desperate. Tell me about them. Please. Martha studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much grace she was willing to extend. Finally, she nodded. Adam is quiet, but he doesn't miss anything. He's the observer, the one who figures out how things work before he touches them. He loves puzzles, like obsessively loves them. Give him a 50-piece jigsaw, and he'll sit there for an hour until it's done. He's careful with his sister, protective. When Nina falls down, Adam's the first one there, helping her up, brushing off her knees. Malcolm's eyes shifted to his son, seeing him now not just as a reminder of his failure, but as a person with his own personality, his own quirks. Adam met his gaze steadily, and Malcolm saw it there. That same analytical nature he recognized in himself, the need to understand before acting. Nina, Martha continued, and her voice warmed with obvious affection, is my wild child. She's fearless, constantly climbing things she shouldn't, jumping off furniture, testing every boundary I set. She talks a mile a minute, sings constantly, usually off-key but with such enthusiasm you can't help but smile. She's the social one. At the playground, she makes friends with every kid there within 5 minutes. She's also stubborn as a mule. If Nina decides she doesn't want to wear shoes that day, well, we're leaving the house with bare feet, and I'm carrying shoes in my purse for when she inevitably steps on something. Despite everything, the guilt, the grief, the crushing weight of his mistakes, Malcolm felt a smile tugging at his lips. Nina sounded like a handful. She sounded perfect. They ask about their father sometimes, Martha said quietly, and the smile died on Malcolm's face. Nina mostly. She sees other kids with dads at the park or at church events, and she wants to know where hers is. I've always told them the truth, age-appropriate truth, but truth. I said their daddy loves them, but he's far away working hard. I never wanted them to think you abandoned them on purpose. That mercy was almost worse than anger would have been. Martha had protected his image to his own children, had given him a grace he absolutely didn't deserve, had left the door open for him in their little hearts, even when she had every right to lock it forever. What do I even say to them? Malcolm whispered. How do I explain 3 years of absence? How do I tell them I didn't know they existed without making them feel like they was some secret their mother kept? You don't, Martha said firmly. Not yet, not today. Today you're just Malcolm, Mama's friend, someone they're meeting for the first time. The rest? That's a conversation for later, for when they're old enough to understand that sometimes adults make mistakes, even with the best intentions. But was that true? Had his intentions been good? Or had he been running from his own fear of failure, using Martha's supposed need for luxury as an excuse to bail before she could see him as anything less than perfect? The plane began its descent, and Malcolm felt panic rising in his chest. They were running out of time, running out of altitude. Soon they'd land, and Martha would take the twins and disappear back into her Indianapolis life, and he'd have lost them all over again. Only this time, he'd know exactly what he was losing. I want to be in their lives, he blurted out. I want to know them, be there for them. I want to... He stopped, realizing how presumptuous he sounded. If you'll let me. If you think I deserve the chance. Martha was quiet for a long time, so long that Malcolm thought she might not answer at all. The plane dropped lower, and through the window he could see the lights of Indianapolis spreading out below them like a constellation of second chances. Finally, Martha spoke. I never stopped loving you, Malcolm. The words hit him like a defibrillator to a stopped heart. I was angry, she continued. I was hurt. There were nights I laid in bed with 2 screaming babies, and I hated you for not being there, for leaving me to figure it out alone. But underneath all of that, I still loved you. I still prayed for you every night, asking God to help you find whatever you were searching for, hoping you'd find peace. She turned to look at him fully now, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I watched your career from a distance, saw the buildings you developed, the deals you closed. I saw your picture in the business section of the paper, and I'd think, good for him. He's getting what he wanted. But I also saw your eyes in those photos, and they looked empty, Malcolm. You looked like a man who'd won everything and lost himself in the process. Was she right? Had he lost himself? Malcolm thought about his life over the past 3 years, the succession of meaningless relationships with women who wanted his money, the business dinners where everyone laughed at his jokes because he was signing their checks, the awards and accolades that sat on shelves in an empty penthouse where no one ever visited. He'd built an empire of one, and he'd convinced himself that was victory. I don't want to hurt them, Malcolm said, his voice breaking. If I come into their lives now and then mess up again, if I let them down, then you'll be human, Martha interrupted. Parents make mistakes, Malcolm. Lord knows I've made plenty. Last week I forgot Nina's favorite stuffed animal at home when we went to my sister's house, and she cried for an hour. 3 months ago, I accidentally threw out a drawing Adam made because I thought it was scrap paper, and he didn't talk to me for the rest of the day. We're not perfect. We're just present. That's all kids really need. Someone who shows up and keeps showing up, even when it's hard. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and Nina jerked awake, disoriented and confused. Mama, she called out, her voice small and scared. Martha immediately unbuckled and pulled her daughter into her lap, whispering reassurances, stroking her hair until Nina's breathing evened out again. It was such a simple thing, such an automatic response. But to Malcolm, it was evidence of 3 years of nights he hadn't been there for, 3 years of scraped knees and bad dreams, and all the tiny catastrophes of childhood that he'd missed. As the plane taxied to the private terminal, Malcolm made a decision. Not the impulsive, pride-driven decisions that had defined his past, but something different, something that felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting that something would catch him. "Come home with me," he said. "Tonight, not to my place, to a hotel somewhere neutral. Let me take you all to dinner. Let me start learning who they are, who you've become. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking to jump back into your life like the last 3 years didn't happen. I'm just asking for a chance to start showing up." Martha looked at her children, Nina now fully awake and babbling about the landing. Adam still quiet but watching everything with those observant eyes. She looked at Malcolm, really looked at him, and he forced himself not to look away, to let her see all the regret and longing and desperate hope he'd been carrying. "One dinner," Martha finally said. "And then we see one dinner." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was an opening, and Malcolm was going to take it with both hands and not let go. The plane came to a stop, and the cabin door opened, letting in the humid Indianapolis evening air. As they stood to deplane, Adam tugged on his mother's hand and pointed at Malcolm. "Mama, is he coming with us?" Martha glanced at Malcolm, a question in her eyes. This was it. The moment where he either stepped into the terrifying unknown of actual fatherhood or let them walk away. Malcolm knelt down so he was at Adam's eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Same nose, same serious expression, same way of tilting his head when processing information. "If it's okay with your mama," Malcolm said carefully, "I'd like to spend some time with you and your sister tonight. Would that be all right?" Adam studied him with an intensity that would have been funny if it weren't so nerve-wracking. Finally, the little boy looked up at Martha. "Is he nice, Mama?" The question hung in the air. Was he nice? That was what it all came down to, wasn't it? Not was he rich or successful or impressive. Just, was he nice? Would he be kind to them? Would he make their mother smile or cry? Martha's hand came to rest on top of Adam's head, and when she answered, her voice was soft but certain. "He's trying to be, baby. He's trying to be." And maybe that was all any of them could really ask for, someone trying their best to be good, to show up, to love better than they had before. As they walked off the plane together, Martha with Nina on her hip, Adam holding her other hand, and Malcolm trailing slightly behind like a man learning his place in a constellation he'd thought he'd lost forever, the Indianapolis sky opened up and rain began to fall. Soft at first, then harder, washing the tarmac clean and turning the city lights into a blur of possibility and hope. Malcolm stood at the bottom of the stairs for just a moment, letting the rain hit his face, feeling like every drop was washing away a layer of the pride and fear that had kept him isolated for so long. When he opened his eyes, Martha was watching him from the shelter of the terminal entrance, Nina already inside, but Martha waiting, holding the door open, giving him a chance to step through into whatever came next. So here's the question hanging over all of us right now. Can you ever really go back? Can broken things be mended, or do they just become different shapes of broken? Malcolm's about to find out, and so are we, because the hardest part isn't admitting you made a mistake, it's living with the consequences while trying to build something new from the wreckage. Stay with me, because what happens over dinner is going to change everything. Again. So here's the question that was burning through everyone's mind as Malcolm followed Martha and the twins through the rain-soaked Indianapolis terminal. What do you say at a dinner table when you're meeting your children for the first time and trying to rebuild a marriage you destroyed 3 years ago? Because there's no guidebook for this, folks. No manual titled How to Become a Father to 3-year-olds who don't know your name. And Malcolm was about to find out that sometimes the most important conversations in life happen over chicken fingers and chocolate milk. The town car Malcolm called pulled up to the terminal entrance, sleek and black with leather seats that still had that new car smell. The driver, a middle-aged man named Frank who'd been working for Malcolm's preferred car service for years, took one look at the twins and immediately softened. "Well now, who do we have here?" he asked, his voice warm and grandfatherly. Nina, never one to meet a stranger, immediately launched into an explanation about the airplane and the clouds and the juice box, while Adam hung back, still cautious, still watching Malcolm with those analytical eyes that saw too much. Martha slid into the back seat with Nina on her lap, and Adam climbed in next to her, leaving Malcolm to take the seat across from them. The configuration felt symbolic somehow. Them on one side, him on the other, a distance that was more than just physical space. As Frank pulled away from the terminal, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the car in a rhythm that felt almost musical. "Where are we going?" Martha asked, and Malcolm realized he hadn't actually thought that far ahead. In his world of high-stakes business deals and carefully orchestrated dinners, he always knew the best restaurants, the places with the right ambience and the perfect wine list. But none of those places were right for this moment. None of them had high chairs or crayons or the kind of patience required for two toddlers, who might decide at any moment that sitting still was completely optional. "What do the twins like?" Malcolm asked, and the question felt monumental in its simplicity. What did his children like? It was such a basic thing, the kind of knowledge every parent should have, and he didn't have a clue. Martha considered for a moment. "There's a place called the Friendly Tavern over in Broad Ripple. It's nothing fancy, but they have a kids menu and the staff doesn't mind when things get messy. Plus, they have this outdoor patio area that's covered, so the kids can move around a bit if they get restless." The Friendly Tavern, not a 5-star restaurant, not even a 4-star, just a neighborhood spot where families went when they wanted good food and didn't want to stress about their children's behavior. It was so far removed from Malcolm's usual scene that he almost suggested an alternative. Almost. But then he looked at Nina, who was now trying to draw pictures on the fogged-up window with her finger, and Adam, who had pulled a small toy car from his pocket and was rolling it along the armrest, and he realized that this wasn't about him. This wasn't about impressing anyone or maintaining an image. This was about meeting his children where they were. "The Friendly Tavern sounds perfect," Malcolm said, and he gave Frank the address. As they drove through Indianapolis, passing familiar landmarks that Malcolm hadn't seen in 3 years, he felt like a stranger in his own hometown. The city had changed. New buildings where old ones used to be, updated storefronts, a different energy. Or maybe the city was the same, and he was the one who had changed, or needed to change. The jury was still out on that one. Nina's chatter filled the car, a constant stream of observations and questions that Martha answered with patient good humor. "Mama, why is the rain falling down and not up? Mama, what's that building? Mama, is that man walking his dog getting wet? Mama, can we get a dog? Mama, why can't we get a dog? Mama, baby, take a breath." Martha laughed, and there was such ease in her voice, such practiced calm, that Malcolm felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Envy? Regret? Admiration? Maybe all three twisted together into something that sat heavy in his chest. Adam, in contrast, remained quiet, his focus entirely on the toy car in his hands. But every few minutes his eyes would flick up to Malcolm, assessing, measuring, trying to figure out who this stranger was and why Mama seemed okay with him being there. Malcolm wanted to say something, wanted to bridge that gap. But what do you say to a 3-year-old who doesn't know you? "Hi, I'm your father. Sorry I missed your entire life so far." Yeah, that would go over well. The Friendly Tavern was exactly what its name suggested, a welcoming, unpretentious place with string lights hanging over the covered patio and the kind of worn wooden tables that had seen 1,000 family dinners. Even in the rain, even on a Monday evening, the place had a warmth to it that Malcolm's high-rise restaurants could never replicate. The hostess, a young woman with bright blue hair and a nose ring, smiled genuinely when she saw the twins. "Well, hello there, cuties. Table for 4. 4. A family of 4. The phrase settled over Malcolm like a blanket he wasn't sure he deserved to wear. They were seated at a corner table on the covered patio, close enough to hear the rain but protected from it. The hostess brought over 2 booster seats without being asked, and produced a small basket of crayons and coloring sheets featuring cartoon animals. Nina dove in immediately, grabbing a purple crayon and attacking a picture of a giraffe. with a kind of enthusiasm that suggested artistic accuracy was not her priority. Adam selected his crayons more carefully, a blue, a green, a red, and began coloring within the lines of a lion with meticulous precision. The server, an older gentleman with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard, approached with menus and a warmth that suggested he'd been doing this job long enough to genuinely love it. "Welcome to the friendly tavern, folks. Can I start you off with some drinks?" "Chocolate milk," Nina announced before anyone else could speak, "and chicken nuggets and fries and—" "Nina, slow down," Martha said gently. "Let everyone order their drinks first." She looked at the server apologetically. "Chocolate milk for both kids, please, and I'll have an iced tea." Malcolm ordered a water, suddenly feeling like alcohol would be inappropriate for this moment, like he needed to be completely present and clear-headed for whatever came next. The server nodded and disappeared, leaving them in a bubble of awkward silence punctuated only by the scratch of crayons on paper. "So," Martha said, and that one word carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. "So, what happens now? So, where do we go from here? So, do you understand the magnitude of what you walked away from?" "So," Malcolm echoed, and then the words just started tumbling out, unpolished and raw. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know what 3-year-olds like or need or how to talk to them. I don't know their favorite colors or their favorite foods or what makes them laugh. I don't know anything, Martha, and that's entirely my fault, and I'm terrified that I'm going to mess this up worse than I already have." Adam looked up from his coloring, his crayon frozen mid-stroke. Nina kept coloring, but Malcolm noticed her movements had slowed, like she was listening even though she appeared not to be. Martha's expression softened, and she reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his, a gesture of comfort that respected the distance still between them. "You start by being here," Martha said quietly. "You start by showing up and staying present. The rest, that comes with time. Adam's favorite color is blue, like the ocean, even though he's never seen it. Nina's is purple or pink, or whatever color catches her eye that day because she changes her mind constantly. They both love mac and cheese, but Adam likes his plain and Nina insists on having hot dog. Pieces mixed in, even though half the time she picks them out and leaves them on her plate. They go to bed at 8 o'clock, but rarely actually fall asleep before 9 because they were in there giggling and talking to each other through the walls between their beds. Each detail was a gift, a piece of the puzzle Malcolm had been missing. He absorbed them greedily, committing every word to memory like it was sacred text. The drinks arrived, and Nina immediately grabbed her chocolate milk with both hands, taking a long sip that left her with a brown mustache. "Mama, look," she giggled, pointing at her upper lip. Martha pulled out a napkin from her purse. She just had one ready. Malcolm noticed, because of course she did, and gently wiped Nina's face. These were the small moments, the mundane acts of parenting that added up to everything, and Malcolm had missed thousands of them. When the server returned to take their food orders, Malcolm found himself paying attention to what the twins chose with an intensity usually reserved for contract negotiations. Chicken nuggets and fries for both, as expected, but Adam wanted ranch dressing for dipping while Nina wanted ketchup. Small differences that revealed their emerging personalities. Martha ordered a grilled chicken salad, and when it came to Malcolm's turn, he realized he hadn't even looked at the menu. "I'll have the same," he said, because food felt entirely beside the point right now. He could have been eating cardboard and wouldn't have noticed. As they waited for the food, Martha pulled out her phone. "I want to show you something," she said, and she began scrolling through photos. "I documented everything, every first, every milestone. I told myself that even if you weren't there, even if you never knew they existed, I wanted them to know that their lives mattered, that every moment was worth remembering." She turned the phone toward Malcolm, and he found himself looking at a photo of 2 impossibly tiny babies in the NICU, hooked up to wires and tubes, their little bodies dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding them. "This is the first picture I took of them together," Martha said. "They were 2 days old. The nurses said they were fighters, that they had APGAR scores better than expected for their size. Malcolm's throat constricted. Those were his children, fighting for life while he was probably closing some meaningless deal. Celebrating with champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that he had become a father. Martha swiped to the next photo. The twins, slightly bigger now, skin to skin on Martha's bare chest, her hospital gown pulled aside. "This is from the first time I got to hold them both at once," she said. "After they'd been in the NICU for 10 days. I cried so hard the nurses thought something was wrong, but I was just so happy to finally have them in my arms." Another swipe. The twins in matching sleepers, asleep in a crib together, their tiny bodies curved toward each other like quotation marks. "They slept better when they were together," Martha explained. "I'd put them in separate cribs and they'd cry, but together, they'd sleep for 3, sometimes 4 hours at a stretch." Photo after photo, Martha walked Malcolm through 3 years of life he'd missed. Their first smiles, Nina's at 6 weeks, Adam's at 8, always the more serious one even then. Their first solid food attempts, their faces covered in mashed sweet potato. Their first steps, Nina at 11 months, bold and confident even when she fell. Adam at 13 months, more cautious, taking one careful step at a time. Their second birthday party, held in Martha's small apartment with decorations that were clearly homemade but filled with love. Their first day at the church daycare, Nina running in without a backward glance while Adam clung to Martha's leg, needing extra reassurance. "I'm showing you these," Martha said, "not to make you feel guilty. Okay, maybe a little. To make you feel guilty, but because I want you to understand what you're stepping into. These aren't blank slates, Malcolm. They're people. Small. People with big personalities and their own histories and experiences. You've missed the beginning of their story, but that doesn't mean you can't be part of the rest of it. If you're really committed, if you're really ready to do the work." The food arrived then, a welcome interruption to the emotional intensity of the moment. Nina attacked her chicken nuggets with gusto, dipping each one in a pool of ketchup she'd poured onto her plate. Adam ate more slowly, methodically dipping each fry in ranch, taking small bites, his eyes still flickering between his food and Malcolm. Malcolm tried to eat his salad, but found he had no appetite. Instead, he watched his children eat, mesmerized by the tiny details. The way Nina swung her legs under the table, unable to sit still even while eating. The way Adam lined up his nuggets in a perfect row before eating them one by one, left to right. These were his children, his blood, his legacy, and he'd almost lost them forever without ever knowing they existed. "Can I ask you something?" Malcolm said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Martha nodded, and he continued, "Why did you get on that plane today? Out of all the flights, all the days, all the possibilities, what were the odds that we'd end up on the same private jet?" Martha's smile was small and enigmatic. "I don't believe in odds, Malcolm. I believe in providence. I've been praying for 3 years that you'd find your way back to us, or that we'd find our way to you. Today, I had a meeting in Chicago about a potential job opportunity. A good one, actually, with a non-profit that does financial literacy, education in underserved communities. My sister's been watching the twins for the last few days while I was up there. I booked the private jet because I could actually afford it this time. I've been saving money, building a better life for us. And when I walked onto that plane and saw you sitting there," she paused, her eyes glistening, "I knew God was answering my prayers in the most unexpected way possible. So it wasn't coincidence. It was something bigger, something that Malcolm's business-focused mind had trouble grasping, but his heart understood perfectly. They were supposed to meet again. The universe, or God, or fate, or whatever you wanted to call it, had conspired to put them in the same place at the same time, because some stories don't get to end with regret and separation. Some stories get second chances. Nina had finished her nuggets and was now more interested in building a tower out of her remaining fries than eating them. "Mama, look, I made a castle," she announced proudly, and the structure immediately collapsed, fries scattering across her plate. Instead of being upset, she laughed. That pure, uninhibited laugh of a child who hasn't learned to be embarrassed by failure yet. "That's beautiful, baby," Martha said, and she meant it. There was no criticism, no correction, just acceptance of Nina's creative chaos. Adam, meanwhile, had finished eating and returned to his coloring, now working on a picture of an elephant. His technique was surprisingly advanced for a 3-year-old, Malcolm thought, though he had no real reference point for these things. "That's really good, Adam," Malcolm ventured, his first direct comment to his son. Adam looked up, surprised that Malcolm had spoken to him. He studied Malcolm's face for a long moment, then looked down at his drawing. "Thank you," he said quietly, and then added, "Do you like elephants?" It was such a simple question, the kind of question one stranger might ask another to find common ground. But it felt monumental. This was his son initiating conversation, opening a door, offering a tiny bridge across the chasm between them. "I do," Malcolm said, and he realized he was leaning forward, eager not to mess this up. "Did you know elephants are some of the smartest animals in the world? They can remember things for their whole lives, and they take care of their families really well." Adam's eyes widened slightly, interest sparked. "How long do they live?" "Sometimes up to 70 years, Malcolm said, grateful he actually knew this random fact. "And the whole elephant family helps take care of the baby elephants. The aunts and grandmothers and older siblings all pitch in. Like our family," Adam said matter-of-factly. "Grandma and Aunt Sarah and the church people all help Mama take care of us." The observation hit Malcolm like a punch. Even at 3 years old, Adam understood that he was part of a community, that family, extended beyond just blood relations to include anyone who showed up and cared. And Malcolm? He'd been absent from that circle entirely. "That's exactly right," Martha said gently, her hand coming to rest on top of Adam's head. "We're very lucky to have so many people who love us." Nina, bored with her fry castle and finished with her food, climbed down from her booster seat and walked around the table to where Malcolm sat. He froze, unsure what she wanted, what she was going to do. She stopped directly in front of him, tilting her head to the side, in a gesture so reminiscent of Martha that it made his chest ache. "You're really tall," Nina observed, which wasn't entirely accurate since Malcolm was sitting down, but he supposed from her perspective everyone was tall. "I guess I am," Malcolm said carefully, afraid to move, afraid to breathe wrong and scare her away. "Can you pick me up?" Nina asked, as casually as if they'd known each other her whole life, instead of having met just hours ago. "I want to see the lights better." Malcolm's eyes shot to Martha, asking silent permission. She nodded, though he could see the tension in her shoulders, the worry in her eyes. This was her baby, after all, and he was still essentially a stranger despite the biology they shared. Slowly, carefully, Malcolm reached down and lifted Nina up, settling her on his hip the way he'd seen Martha do earlier. She was heavier than he expected, solid and real and warm against him. She smelled like chocolate milk and children's shampoo and something indefinably sweet that he realized was just the scent of childhood itself. Nina immediately pointed at the string lights hanging over the patio. "Pretty," she declared. "Mama, look how pretty from up here." "I see, baby," Martha said, but she was watching Malcolm, not the lights, watching how he held her daughter, how his hand splayed protectively. Across Nina's back, how his expression had gone soft and wondering. "You know what else is pretty?" Malcolm said, and he was amazed his voice stayed steady. "You are. You're beautiful, just like your mama." Nina giggled, delighted by the compliment. "You're silly," she announced. "Mama says I'm beautiful every day. She says Adam is handsome. She says we're her greatest treasures." "Your mama is very smart," Malcolm said, and over Nina's head, his eyes met Martha's. There was so much he wanted to say, so many apologies and promises and declarations, but this wasn't the time. Right now, he was just a man holding his daughter for the first time, and that was enough. That had to be enough. After a few more minutes of Nina pointing out various things from her elevated vantage point, Martha gently suggested it was time to think about heading home. "It's getting late, and someone has daycare tomorrow," she said, her eyes on Nina, who was already rubbing her eyes with one small fist. The check came, and Malcolm paid it without looking at the total, leaving a tip that was probably excessive but felt appropriate given the life-changing nature of the evening. As they prepared to leave, Adam carefully gathered up his crayons and put them back in the basket. A small gesture of consideration that spoke volumes about how Martha was raising them. Back in the town car, the twins were noticeably quieter, the day catching up to them. Nina curled up against Martha's side, her thumb finding its way to her mouth, despite Martha's gentle redirection. Adam leaned against the window, his toy car clutched in his hand, his eyelids drooping. "Where do you live now?" Malcolm asked Martha. "I'll have Frank take you home." Martha gave an address in Fountain Square, the same neighborhood she'd mentioned earlier. It was a solid, working-class area, the kind of place where people knew. Their neighbors and kids played in the streets on summer evenings. It was nothing like the high-rise luxury Malcolm inhabited. The drive took about 20 minutes, and by the time they pulled up to Martha's building, a modest 3-story apartment complex with a small playground visible in the courtyard, both twins were fully asleep. Nina had her head in Martha's lap, and Adam was slumped against the car door, his mouth slightly open in that boneless way sleeping children have. "I'll help you get them inside," Malcolm said, and before Martha could protest, he was out of the car and gently lifting Adam into his arms. The boy barely stirred, just made a small sound and burrowed his face against Malcolm's shoulder. The weight of him, the trust implicit in that unconscious gesture, nearly brought Malcolm to his knees. Martha carried Nina, and Malcolm followed her up 2 flights of stairs to apartment 2C. She unlocked the door and led him inside, and Malcolm got his first glimpse of the world his children had been living in. It was small but immaculately kept, with toy bins neatly arranged, against one wall and children's artwork covering the refrigerator. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable, the kind of pieces you'd find at thrift stores and garage sales, but what struck Malcolm most was how loved it felt. Every corner had evidence of the life Martha had built, photos on the walls, handmade, decorations, a sense of home that his expensive penthouse had never achieved. "Their room is this way," Martha whispered, and she led him down a short hallway to a bedroom that was tiny but filled with love. 2 toddler beds were arranged against opposite walls, each with matching bedding, astronauts for Adam, butterflies for Nina. A nightlight shaped like a moon cast a soft glow over the room. Martha laid Nina down first, removing her shoes and pulling a light blanket over her. Malcolm stood there holding Adam, suddenly afraid to move, afraid he'd do it wrong. But Martha just gestured to the other bed, and he carefully, so carefully, laid his son down, removing his shoes the way Martha had done with Nina. Adam's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and confused. "Mama," he murmured. "Right here, baby," Martha said, moving to his side. "Go back to sleep." "Who?" Adam's eyes tried to focus on Malcolm, and Malcolm held his breath, waiting. "Just Mama's friend," Martha said soothingly. "He helped carry you upstairs because you were so sleepy. Close your eyes now." Adam's eyes closed obediently, and within seconds, his breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of childhood sleep. Martha bent down and kissed his forehead, then moved to Nina's bed and did the same. It was such a simple ritual, but Malcolm understood it was sacred, a nightly reaffirmation of love that these children had received every single day of their lives. They tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, and moved to the small living room. Martha sank onto the couch with a sigh, and Malcolm remained standing, feeling like an intruder now that the buffer of the children was gone. "Thank you," Martha said finally, "for dinner, for meeting them, for carrying Adam upstairs." "Thank you," Malcolm countered, "for letting me, for not slamming the door in my face on that plane, for giving me a chance I absolutely don't deserve." Martha studied him for a long moment. "Why did you really leave, Malcolm? And don't tell me it was because you couldn't provide the life you promised. I never needed mansions. I never needed any of that. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment where he either laid himself bare or lost everything again." Malcolm sat down on the chair across from Martha, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I was scared," he admitted. "Terrified, actually. My father left when I was 8, just walked out one day and never came back. My mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and I watched her age 20 years in the span of 5. I watched her cry herself to sleep when she thought I couldn't hear. I watched her decide between paying the electric bill or buying groceries. And I promised myself that I would never, ever put my own family through that. Martha's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. When we got married, Malcolm continued, I had this vision of the life I was going to give you. I was going to be the opposite of my father. I was going to provide so well that you'd never have to worry, never have to choose between bills, never have to work yourself to exhaustion. And when the deals started falling through, when the money wasn't coming in as fast as I'd projected, I panicked. I thought, if I couldn't give you that perfect life, I was already becoming my father, a failure, a disappointment, someone who made promises he couldn't keep. So you left, Martha said quietly. You became exactly what you were afraid of becoming, a man who walked away from his family. The words should have stung, but they didn't. They were just truth, plain and simple. Yeah, Malcolm said. The irony isn't lost on me. I was so afraid of failing you slowly that I failed you completely and immediately instead. Did you ever consider, Martha said, leaning forward now too, closing the distance, between them, that maybe I had a say in what kind of life I wanted, that maybe I married you not for what you could provide, but for who you were? Did it ever occur to you that working through hard times together might have been more valuable than any mansion you could have bought me? It should have, Malcolm said. God, it should have. But I was 26 and arrogant and convinced I knew what was best. I thought I was being noble, setting you free to find someone better. What I was really doing was running from my own fear of inadequacy. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 years of missed opportunities and misunderstandings hanging between them. So what now? Martha asked. You've met them. You've seen the life we've built. What are you asking for here, Malcolm? This was the question, wasn't it? What did he want? To swoop in and play dad on weekends? To throw money at the situation and call it parenting? To try to rebuild what they'd had before, as if the last 3 years could be erased? I want to be their father, Malcolm said slowly, choosing each word carefully. Not just in biology, but in every way that matters. I want to be the one they call when they're scared or excited or need help with homework. I want to be at their birthday parties, and their school plays, and their soccer games or dance recitals, or whatever activities they end up loving. I want to read them bedtime stories and teach them to ride bikes and embarrass them when they're teenagers by telling stories about when they were little. He paused, gathering courage for the next part. And I want us to try again, not to go back to what we were. We can't do that, and honestly, we shouldn't. What we were wasn't working, at least not for me, because I was too broken to let it work, but to build something new, something stronger. Something based on who we actually are now, instead of who we thought we were supposed to be. Martha was quiet for so long that Malcolm thought maybe he'd asked for too much, pushed too hard, assumed too much grace. But then she spoke, and her voice was steady and clear. I need to think about it, she said. Not about you being in their lives. If you're serious about that, if you're committed to showing up consistently and being a real presence, then yes, I want that for them. They deserve to know their father. But the rest, us, that's more complicated. You hurt me, Malcolm, deeply, and I've spent 3 years building a life where I don't need anyone to rescue me or provide for me. I'm proud of that independence. I'm proud of the woman I've become without you. You should be, Malcolm said fervently. Martha, you should be. You're incredible. What you've done, raising them on your own, building community, staying strong. That's more impressive than any business deal I've ever closed. So, you understand why I can't just jump back into being your wife, Martha continued. I need to see that you've really changed, that this isn't just guilt or a midlife crisis or whatever. I need to see you show up, day after day, week after week, month after month. I need to see you be consistent. The twins, they're at an age where they're starting to really remember things, to form lasting memories. If you're in, you're all in. You can't decide 6 months from now that this is too hard or too complicated and walk away again. Because if you do that, You won't just be abandoning me this time, you'll be abandoning them. And I won't let you break their hearts the way you broke mine. I understand, Malcolm said, and he did. This wasn't a negotiation where he could fast-track the process or throw money at the problem. This was going to require time, patience, and consistent action. The very things his pride and impatience had kept him from offering 3 years ago. Here's what I propose, Martha said, and Malcolm recognized the tone. This was Martha in planning mode, the same way she used to approach their budget discussions or vacation planning back when they were married. You can see them twice a week to start. Supervised visits here at the apartment or in public places. We'll tell them you're Mama's friend who wants to get to know them. Once they're comfortable with you, once you've proven you're reliable and consistent, we'll tell them the truth about who you are. But that's not happening next week, or even next month. That happens when I say they're ready, and when I trust that you'll stick around. Okay, Malcolm said immediately. Whatever you think is best. You know them. I don't. I trust your judgment. Martha raised an eyebrow. The Malcolm I remember didn't trust anyone's judgment but his own. The Malcolm you remember was an idiot, he said bluntly. The Malcolm sitting here now has learned, is still learning, that maybe he doesn't have all the answers. Maybe he never did. A small smile tugged at Martha's lips. That's growth, she acknowledged. All right. We'll start with Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6 to 8. You can come here. We'll have dinner together. You can play with them. Help with bath time if you're brave enough to tackle that chaos. And Malcolm, you're going to mess up. You're going to do things wrong. They're going to test you, especially Nina, who tests everyone. You're going to feel frustrated and confused and completely out of your depth. That's normal. That's parenting. I can handle it, Malcolm said, though truthfully, he had no idea if he could. But he was going to try. God, he was going to try. They talked for another hour, working out the logistics, the boundaries, the expectations. Martha was clear about her rules. No expensive gifts that would overwhelm the twins or make them see him as a source of things rather than a source of love. No making promises he couldn't keep. No speaking negatively about Martha or her choices to the children. And absolutely no attempts to buy his way into their good graces. By the time Malcolm left the apartment, it was nearly 11 at night, and Indianapolis was quiet around him. Frank was still waiting with the car, patient and professional. As they drove toward Malcolm's downtown high-rise, he looked at the city with new eyes. Somewhere in this city, his children were sleeping. Somewhere in this city, the woman he'd never stopped loving was probably lying awake, wondering if she'd made the right choice letting him back into their lives. The next morning, Malcolm woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Instead of immediately checking his phone for market reports or email updates from his various projects, he found himself Googling things like best toys for 3-year-olds and how to talk to toddlers and what do preschoolers need from fathers. His assistant, Diane, nearly dropped her coffee when he called her into his office at 9 a.m. and announced he'd be leaving the office by 5 p.m. Every Tuesday and Thursday from now on. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Hartley? She asked, concern etched on her face. Malcolm Hartley didn't leave the office before 7 p.m. Ever. He worked weekends. He took calls during dinner. He was legendary in their industry for his work ethic, which was really just code for his inability to have a life outside of work. I'm feeling better than I have in years, actually, Malcolm said. I have some personal obligations that are non-negotiable. Reschedule anything that conflicts. Diane stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. Of course, sir. May I ask, does this have anything to do with the fact that you're smiling? Because I've worked for you for 2 years and I don't think I've ever seen you actually smile before. Malcolm touched his face, surprised to find she was right. He was smiling. Yeah, he said. It has everything to do with that. That Tuesday evening, Malcolm arrived at Martha's apartment at exactly 6 p.m., carrying a reusable grocery bag that Diane had helped him pack with ingredients for simple dinners. No fancy steaks or complicated recipes, just the basics for tacos, which Martha had mentioned both twins loved. He'd also brought a children's book about elephants, remembering Adam's interest from their dinner. Martha answered the door with Nina on her hip and Adam peeking out from behind her legs. Right on time, she said, and he couldn't tell if she was surprised or just acknowledging the fact. Malcolm said, stepping inside, "And this is the most important meeting of my life." Nina squirmed to be put down, and when Martha set her on the floor, she immediately grabbed Malcolm's hand. "Did you bring treats?" she asked with a kind of mercenary directness only a 3-year-old could pull off. "Nina, that's not polite," Martha chided gently, but Malcolm just laughed. "I brought ingredients for tacos," he said. "Your mom said you like those. And I brought a book about elephants for Adam, if that's okay with your mama." Adam's eyes lit up, and he stepped out from behind Martha's legs. "Really? Can I see it?" Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 8 p.m., Malcolm would arrive at apartment 2C and step into a world that was chaotic and wonderful, and nothing like the sterile perfection of his penthouse. He learned that getting 2 3-year-olds to eat dinner was less about serving food and more about negotiation, distraction, and accepting that most of the meal would end up on the floor. He learned that bath time was indeed a test of patience, with Nina insisting on making beards out of Bubbles and Adam trying to bring 17 toys into the tub, despite it being physically impossible. He learned that bedtime stories required different voices for different characters, and that, if you skipped even one page of a familiar book, Nina would call you out immediately. He learned that Adam liked his nightlight to be positioned exactly, so not too bright but not too dim, and that both children required specific arrangements of stuffed animals before they could sleep, arrangements that seemed to change based on no discernible logic. But more than the practical lessons of parenting, Malcolm learned about his children as people. He learned that Adam was fascinated by how things worked, constantly asking why and how until Malcolm had to Google answers on his phone. He learned that Nina had a gift for making friends with literally everyone, from the mailman to the elderly woman in apartment 1A who always had cookies. He learned that they fought like cats and dogs one minute and were inseparable the next, that they had their own secret language of inside jokes and made-up words. And he learned about himself. He learned that he had more patience than he'd ever given himself credit for, that making a 3-year-old laugh was more satisfying than closing a multi-million-dollar deal, that being needed, really needed, not just for his money or his connections, but for his presence, filled something in him he hadn't known was empty. 6 weeks into their routine, on a Thursday evening in late July, something shifted. Malcolm was helping Adam build a block tower, each block carefully placed according to Adam's precise specifications, when Nina climbed into his lap uninvited and announced, "You're my favorite friend of Mama's." Malcolm's hands stilled on the blocks. Martha, who was folding laundry in the corner, looked up sharply. "Why is that?" Malcolm asked carefully, afraid to presume, afraid to read too much into it. "Because you come back," Nina said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Mama has other friends, but they don't come back every Tuesday and every Thursday. But you do. You always come back." The words hit Malcolm like a freight train. You always come back. Such a simple thing, showing up consistently, being reliable. But to these children who were just beginning to understand object permanence, just learning that people could leave and return, consistency was everything. It was love made tangible. Martha's eyes met his over Nina's head, and he saw tears glistening there. She'd been testing him, he realized. Not maliciously, but necessarily. She'd been watching to see if he'd keep his word, if he'd show up when it was convenient, and when it wasn't, if he'd be there on the good days and the hard days. And he had been. He'd rearranged his entire schedule around these 8 hours a week. He'd turned down business dinners and networking events and opportunities that would have been automatic yeses 6 weeks ago, because nothing was more important than this, than building trust with his children, than proving to Martha that he'd changed, than becoming the man he should have been 3 years ago. That night, after the twins were in bed, and he and Martha were sharing a rare moment of adult conversation over tea at her kitchen table, Martha said something that changed everything. "They ask about you now," she said quietly, "when you're not here. Nina wonders what you're doing. Adam asks if Tuesday is tomorrow yet, and when I say no, he counts down the days. They're getting attached, Malcolm. "Is that a bad thing?" he asked, his heart suddenly racing. "No," Martha said slowly, "but it means we need to have a conversation about what happens next, about what you are to them." Malcolm set down his tea. "What do you want to tell them?" Martha was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. "I think," she said finally, "it's time to tell them the truth. That you're not just Mama's friend, that you're their father." The word father settled over Malcolm like a mantle, heavy and sacred and terrifying. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Are they ready?" "I think so," Martha said. "But more than that, I think you're ready. You've proven yourself, Malcolm. You've shown up consistently for 6 weeks. You've been patient and present and everything I hoped you would be. And the truth is, I don't want to keep lying to them. Even little lies, even lies of omission, they deserve to know who you are." So the following Tuesday, with Martha's guidance and support, Malcolm sat down with Adam and Nina on the living room floor and told them a story. He told them about a man who was scared and made a big mistake, who went away because he thought it was the right thing, but realized too late that he was wrong. He told them about their mama, who was brave and strong, and loved them so much she built a whole life for them. And he told them that he was their daddy, and he was sorry he hadn't been there before, but he was here now, and he wanted to be here for always. Nina, being Nina, immediately had questions. "So you're my daddy, like Sarah's daddy? The one who picks her up from daycare and pushes her on the swings?" "Yes," Malcolm said, his voice thick. "If you'll let me be." "Can you push me really high on the swings?" Nina asked, her priorities crystal clear. "As high as you want," Malcolm promised. Adam was quieter, more thoughtful. He studied Malcolm's face for a long time, and Malcolm let him look, let him process, didn't rush him to respond. Finally, Adam asked, "Are you going to go away again?" The question was a knife to Malcolm's heart, but it was fair. It was the question that mattered most. "No," Malcolm said firmly. "I'm going to stay. I'm going to be here every Tuesday and Thursday like always, and even more than that if your mama says it's okay. I'm going to be at your birthday parties, and when you lose your first tooth, and when you learn to ride a bike. I'm going to be there when you're happy, and when you're sad, and when you're scared. That's what daddies do. They stay." Adam considered this, then crawled forward and put his small hand on Malcolm's knee. "Okay," he said simply, "you can be my daddy." And just like that, with a 3-year-old's blessing and trust, Malcolm became a father in truth and not just biology. The months that followed were a masterclass in rebuilding. Malcolm found a family therapist, someone who specialized in blended families and reconciliation, and he and Martha started attending sessions together. They talked about the past, about the hurt and the healing, about their expectations and their fears. They learned to communicate in ways they never had during their marriage, with honesty and vulnerability instead of assumptions and pride. Malcolm started attending Martha's church, sitting in the pew as she sang with the choir, her voice still as beautiful as the day he'd first heard it 7 years ago. He met her community, the people who had supported her when he hadn't, and he thanked them with genuine humility for being there when he wasn't. Some of them were wary of him at first, protective of Martha and the twins, but over time, as they saw his consistency, his commitment, they welcomed him into the fold. He started attending the twins' daycare events, showing up to their little performances and art shows. He went to parent-teacher conferences with Martha and learned that Adam might need speech therapy for a slight delay and that Nina was reading ahead of her age level. He made decisions with Martha about their children's lives, respecting her knowledge and experience while contributing his own observations and ideas. And slowly, carefully, he and Martha rebuilt their relationship, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with small moments of connection. Conversations over tea after the twins were in bed, texts during the day checking in, shared laughter over the ridiculous things their children said and did. Slowly, the distance between them closed, and the woman who had once been his wife became something more, a partner in the truest sense, someone he respected and admired, and yes, still loved, had never stopped loving. 4 months after their reunion on the plane, Malcolm brought Martha to see the house he'd mentioned that first night. It wasn't in a ritzy neighborhood or filled with ostentatious luxury. It was a 4-bedroom craftsman in a family-friendly area near a good public school with a backyard big enough for a swing set and a front porch perfect for summer evenings. "This is what you bought?" Martha asked, walking through the empty rooms. "This is what you wanted to give us?" "I bought it 3 months ago," Malcolm admitted, "before I knew if you'd ever let me into your lives permanently. I bought it as an act of faith, I guess. A promise to myself that I was going to build something real this time, not just impressive." Martha stood in what would be the living room, looking out at the backyard, where Adam and Nina were already running around, exploring their potential new domain with the uninhibited joy of children who didn't understand mortgages or property values, who just saw space to play. "It's perfect," Martha said softly. "It's exactly what I would have chosen." "Then choose it," Malcolm said, and he got down on one knee right there in the empty living room. "Choose us. Choose this family we're building. Choose to let me spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you deserve and the father they need. Marry me again, Martha, not like before, not with promises of luxury and grand gestures. Marry me for real this time. Marry me for love and partnership and all the mundane, beautiful chaos of building a life together." He pulled out a ring, not the enormous diamond he'd given her the first time, bought to impress, but a simple gold band with 3 small stones, a sapphire for Adam, a pink tourmaline for Nina, and a diamond, in the center representing the love that held them all together. Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You understand, this won't be easy," she said, "that there will be hard days and fights and moments when we frustrate each other." "I'm counting on it," Malcolm said. "Easy is boring. Easy doesn't teach you anything. I want the real thing, Martha. All of it. The good and the hard and everything in between." "Then yes," Martha said, and she pulled him to his feet. "Yes, I'll marry you again. I'll let you be my partner and their father, and we'll build this beautiful, messy, imperfect life together." They were married 3 months later, in the same park where they'd had their first wedding 7 years earlier. It was a small ceremony, just close family and friends, with Adam serving as ring bearer and Nina as flower girl. Both children took their responsibilities incredibly seriously, though Nina did end up throwing all the petals at once, instead of sprinkling them down the aisle, like she'd been instructed. Pastor Richards, who had been there the night the twins were born, officiated. Martha wore a simple dress, cream-colored with blue flowers, the same one she'd worn on the plane that fateful day. Malcolm wore a suit, but without the armor of arrogance he used to hide behind. When they said their vows, they meant them, not because they were young and naive and thought love would be easy, but because they were older and wiser and knew love was a choice you made every day. "I promise to stay," Malcolm said, his voice breaking. "When it's hard, when it's easy, when I'm tired, when you're frustrated with me. I promise to show up and keep showing up. I promise to be present. I promise to choose us every single day. I promise to let you in," Martha said, "to trust you with my heart, even though you broke it once. To believe in the man you're becoming even when the ghosts of who you were try to make me doubt. I promise to build this life with you as true partners, not as someone who needs rescuing and someone who needs to be needed, but as 2 whole people who choose each other." When Pastor Richards pronounced them husband and wife again, Adam and Nina cheered louder than anyone else there. They moved into the craftsman house the following month, and Malcolm learned what it meant to live in a home instead of just a residence. He learned that houses got messy when children lived in them, that toys would migrate to every room no matter how many times you cleaned, that crayon marks on walls were signs of life being lived, not property being damaged. He learned to navigate co-parenting with Martha, to respect her instincts while trusting his own growing knowledge of his children. He learned that sometimes the twins would play them against each other, asking Daddy for something after Mama said no, and that presenting a united front required constant communication and mutual respect. He learned that being a father meant sometimes being the bad guy. It meant setting boundaries and enforcing consequences even when his children's disappointed faces made him want to cave. It meant teaching them that love and discipline weren't opposites but partners, that structure and rules existed because he cared about the people they were becoming. But he also learned about the profound joys of fatherhood. The first time Nina ran to him instead of Martha when she fell and scraped her knee, crying, "Daddy, kiss it better," his heart almost exploded. The first time Adam said, "I love you, Daddy," unprompted, just a casual statement while they were building with Legos, Malcolm had to excuse himself to the bathroom to collect himself. He was there for their 4th birthday party, a chaotic affair in their backyard with a dozen screaming children and a piñata that took 20 minutes to break open. He was there for Adam's first soccer game, where his son spent more time picking dandelions than chasing the ball, and he cheered like it was the World Cup. He was there for Nina's preschool graduation, where she sang a solo that was enthusiastic if not exactly on key, and he was the loudest one applauding. And through it all, he and Martha grew together instead of apart. They learned to fight fair, to apologize sincerely, to forgive fully. They learned that marriage wasn't about grand gestures but about small choices, choosing to listen when you'd rather defend yourself, choosing to say thank you for the dishes being done, choosing to notice when your partner was tired, and stepping up without being asked. 1 year after their reunion on the plane, almost to the day, Malcolm found himself back at the friendly tavern with his family. Same corner table on the covered patio. Same chicken nuggets and fries for the twins, though they were bigger now, more coordinated, less likely to spill their drinks. Same loving chaos that made his heart full in ways his old life never had. As Nina regaled them with a story about something that happened at daycare, complete with dramatic hand gestures, that knocked over her water cup, some things never changed, Malcolm looked around the table at his family. His family. Not biology that he'd run from, not obligation he'd accepted, but the people he'd chosen and kept choosing every single day. Martha caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing," Malcolm said, but he reached across the table and took her hand. "Everything. I'm just grateful. For second chances, for your faith in me, for this." "This?" Martha teased. "A child-friendly restaurant with mediocre food and sticky tables?" "This life," Malcolm corrected. "This beautiful, messy, perfect life. I spent 3 years chasing wealth and success, thinking that's what would make me happy, what would make me worthy. But this, sitting here with you and them, wiping up spilled water and negotiating how many bites of chicken they need to eat before they get dessert. This is everything. This is the real wealth I was looking for all along." Adam, who had been quietly eating his nuggets and listening to the adult conversation with his usual serious attention, looked up at Malcolm. "Daddy?" "Yeah, buddy." "Are you happy?" The question was so simple, so direct, so perfectly Adam. Malcolm's eyes stung with sudden tears. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "I'm the happiest I've ever been." "Good," Adam said, satisfied, and went back to his meal. Later that night, after the twins were in bed and Malcolm and Martha were curled up on the couch in their living room, Martha asked, "Do you ever regret it? The time you lost? The 3 years you missed?" Malcolm thought about it carefully. Did he regret it? Missing their birth, their first words, their first steps, all those irreplaceable moments. "I regret the pain I caused," he said finally. "I regret that you had to do it alone, that they didn't have a father for those first 3 years. I regret every single moment you were struggling, while I was too blind to see what really mattered. But do I regret the journey that brought us here? To this version of our family where I've learned to value the right things? No, because I don't know if I could have been the father they needed if I hadn't learned these lessons the hard way. I wish I'd learned them sooner. I wish you hadn't had to pay the price for my education. But I can't regret anything that led us to this moment right now." Martha nodded, understanding what he meant. "We can't go back," she said, "but we can go forward. And I think we're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to be great," Malcolm said, and he meant it. Not because their life was perfect, or because there wouldn't be challenges ahead, but because they were facing those challenges together, as a team, as a family. 6 months later, Martha came home from a doctor's appointment with news that made Malcolm's heart stop and restart in the same moment. "I'm pregnant," she said, and she watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of the panic that had driven him away before. But Malcolm didn't panic. He didn't feel inadequate or unprepared or scared that he couldn't provide. Instead, he felt joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. He swept Martha into his arms and spun her around, laughing. "We're having a baby," he said, and then corrected himself. "We're having another baby, together this time. All of us together." When they told Adam and Nina that evening, Nina immediately had opinions about names, and whether the baby should be a boy or girl. She wanted a sister, naturally. Adam was quieter, processing, but eventually asked, "Will you still be my daddy when the new baby comes?" The question broke Malcolm's heart and mended it simultaneously. He pulled Adam onto his lap and looked him straight in the eyes. "Adam, listen to me. I will always be your daddy. New babies don't change that. They just make our family bigger. My heart is big enough for all of you, and it's going to keep getting bigger. You and Nina taught me how to be a daddy. This new baby, they're lucky they'll have you two as big siblings to show them the ropes." Adam considered this, then nodded, satisfied. "Okay, but I get to teach them about Legos. Deal." Malcolm laughed. Their daughter, they named her Grace because that's what Martha had shown him and what had saved them all, was born on a Tuesday evening in March. Malcolm was there for every contraction, every push, every miraculous moment. And when they placed Grace in his arms for the first time, he looked at her tiny face and made a silent promise that she would never know a day when her father wasn't present, wasn't committed, wasn't all in. Adam and Nina met their sister the next day, scrubbed clean and wearing the big brother and big sister t-shirts Malcolm had bought for them. Nina immediately wanted to hold the baby, while Adam hung back, studying his new sister with the same careful observation he applied to everything. "She's really small," Adam observed. "You were that small once," Martha said, tired but radiant in her hospital bed. "And look how big and strong you got," Malcolm added. "Grace is going to grow up looking up to you two, wanting to be just like her big brother and sister." Nina beamed at this responsibility. Adam just nodded seriously, already taking his big brother duties to heart. Life with 3 children was exponentially more chaotic than life with 2. The house that had seemed spacious now felt constantly full of noise and activity, and the particular brand of joyful chaos that comes with raising small humans. Malcolm cut back even more on his work hours, bringing on a partner to handle day-to-day operations so he could be more present at home. Some of his colleagues thought he was crazy, walking away from the height of his career to change diapers and break up sibling squabbles. But Malcolm knew better. He'd learned his lesson about what really mattered. On a Sunday morning, 2 years after Grace was born, Malcolm found himself in the church where Martha sang, where they'd been married for the 2nd time, where their family had been embraced and supported. Adam was 6 now, Nina was 5, and Grace was 2, all growing faster than seemed possible. They sat in their usual pew, Grace on his lap, Nina next to him coloring on the children's bulletin. Adam on Martha's other side, reading ahead in the hymnal because he liked to be prepared. As Martha stood with the choir and began to sing, her voice filling the sanctuary with a beauty that still gave Malcolm chills. After all these years, he looked around at his children, at Adam, who had inherited his analytical mind but tempered it with Martha's kindness, at Nina, who had his ambition but channeled it into bringing people together rather than building empires, at Grace, who was too young to show who she'd become, but already showed signs of being a perfect blend of both her parents. This was his legacy, not the buildings he'd developed, or the deals he'd closed, or the money he'd made. This family, these people, this love that had been tested and had emerged stronger, this was what would outlast him, what would matter long after he was gone. And in that moment, sitting in a church pew with his youngest daughter drooling on his shoulder and his older children fidgeting beside him, Malcolm understood something profound. He had been so afraid of becoming his father, of failing to provide, that he'd almost failed in the exact same way, by walking away. But the difference between him and his father was that he'd gotten a second chance. He'd been given grace he didn't deserve, offered forgiveness he couldn't earn, and welcomed back into a family he'd abandoned. Not everyone gets a second chance. Not everyone gets to rebuild what they've destroyed. Malcolm knew how lucky he was, how easily this could have gone differently. If that plane had been delayed, if Martha had chosen a different flight, if she'd been less forgiving or he'd been less willing to change, the dominoes could have fallen 100 different ways, all of them leading to a life where he never knew his children, never repaired. His marriage never found this profound joy that made everything else seem small by comparison. After the service, as they walked to their car through the parking lot, Nina took his hand on one side, and Adam took the other. Martha carried Grace, who was already half asleep against her mother's shoulder. They looked like any other family leaving church on a Sunday morning. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. Just another family navigating the beautiful chaos of life together. But to Malcolm, they were everything. They were the answer to every question he'd ever asked, the solution to every problem he'd tried to solve with money or success or achievement. They were home. They were purpose. They were the family he'd almost lost, and the life he'd almost missed, and the love that had saved him from himself. "Daddy," Nina said as they reached the car, "can we get ice cream?" "Nina, we just had donuts at coffee hour," Martha said, laughing. "But Daddy loves ice cream," Nina argued, deploying the manipulation tactics she'd perfected over 5 years of life. Malcolm looked at Martha over the roof of the car, and she rolled her eyes but smiled. "One small cone," she said, "and you have to share with your brother." "And Grace?" Adam asked, always thinking of his little sister. "Grace can have a few bites of mine," Martha said, as they piled into the car, bickering good-naturedly about flavors and who got to sit in which seat. Malcolm felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was it. This was the life he'd been searching for in all the wrong places. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and true, and overflowing with a love that had survived separation and thrived despite the odds. So here's what I want you to take away from Malcolm and Martha's story, from this journey from pride to humility, from isolation to family, from empty success to meaningful connection. First, understand that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds or any of the things our culture tells us matter. Real wealth is measured in relationships, in trust, in the people who show up for you and the people you show up for. Malcolm had millions of dollars and an empire of achievements, but he was bankrupt in the ways that actually mattered until he learned to value the right things. Second, never underestimate the power of showing up. Consistency might not be flashy, but it's everything. It's the foundation on which trust is built, the proof that love isn't just a feeling but a choice you make again and again. Martha didn't need Malcolm to be perfect. She needed him to be present. She needed him to keep his promises. She needed him to choose them, day after day after day. And when he finally learned to do that, everything else fell into place. Third, second chances are rare and precious, and should never be taken for granted. Not everyone gets one. Not everyone deserves one. Malcolm was incredibly fortunate that Martha was willing to extend grace after the pain he'd caused. But grace isn't licensed to be careless. It's responsibility to do better. If you're lucky enough to get a second chance at something that matters, treat it like the gift it is. Don't waste it. Don't assume there'll be a third. Fourth, the things you're chasing might not be the things you actually need. Malcolm spent years pursuing financial success because he thought that's what would make him worthy, what would prove he wasn't like his father. But in chasing that external validation, he became exactly what he feared, a man who abandoned his family. Sometimes the thing you're running toward is actually taking you further from what you need. Sometimes you have to stop running and start being still long enough to figure out what truly matters. And finally, it's never too late to change. Malcolm was 32 when he met his children for the first time. He'd missed 3 years of their lives. He'd caused tremendous pain. He'd made catastrophic mistakes driven by pride and fear. But he didn't let that past define his future. He did the hard work of transformation, of becoming someone different, someone better. He faced his failures with honesty and worked every day to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Your story doesn't have to end with your mistakes. You can write a different ending. But you have to be willing to do the work, to face uncomfortable truths, to change in fundamental ways. You have to be willing to show up consistently even when it's hard, to value relationships, over achievements, to measure success by different metrics than the world tells you to use. Now I want to hear from you, because this community is built on conversation, on sharing our stories and learning from each other. Have you ever walked away from something important and gotten a second chance to make it right? Or are you currently in a situation where you're realizing you've been chasing the wrong things, valuing the wrong measures of success? Maybe you're someone who has shown grace to a person who hurt you, who has chosen to forgive and rebuild rather than nurse grudges. Or maybe you're someone who needs to hear that it's not too late, that you can still choose differently, that your past doesn't have to determine your future. Drop your stories in the comments. Tell me about your second chances, your moments of realization, your journeys from pride to humility, or from isolation to connection. Tell me about the people who showed up for you consistently, or the times you learned to show up for others. This isn't just entertainment, folks. This is real life, and your experiences matter. Your stories have the power to encourage someone else who's struggling, to give hope to someone who thinks they've messed up too badly to be forgiven, to remind all of us that transformation is possible. And hey, if this story moved you, if Malcolm and Martha's journey resonated with something in your own life, do me a favor and smash that like button. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because I'm telling you right now, we have more stories coming that will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you what really matters in this life. Stories about redemption and second chances, about people who lost their way and found it again, about the extraordinary resilience of the human heart when it comes to loving and forgiving and starting over. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You know who I'm talking about. That friend who's working themselves to death chasing success that won't satisfy them. That family member who walked away from something important and thinks it's too late to go back. That person in your life who needs to be reminded that showing up consistently is more powerful than any grand gesture. Before you go, I want to leave you with the same question that haunted Malcolm. During his journey, what are you chasing? And is it really what you need? Are you building an empire but missing the kingdom that matters? Are you climbing the ladder of success only to find it's leaning against the wrong wall? Are you so busy providing that you're failing to be present? Think about that. Sit with it. And if you realize you need to make some changes, don't wait for a chance encounter on a private jet to force your hand. Don't wait until you've missed 3 years or 10 years or a lifetime. Start now. Show up today. Make the call, send the text, book the flight, have the conversation, change the trajectory. Because time is the one thing you can't get back, and the people who matter won't wait forever. This is Mr. Gideon, reminding you that the best stories aren't just about what happens to us. They're about what we do with what happens to us. They're about the choices we make after we've made mistakes, the people we become after we've been broken, the families we build after we've learned what really matters. And your story, it's not over yet, not by a long shot. Until next time, keep showing up, keep choosing love over pride, keep valuing people over possessions, and keep believing that it's never too late to write a different ending. Now hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story, because we're just getting started, and trust me, the best is yet to come.